whether or not I wanted to quit, but whether or not I was equipped to deal with the challenge that we had to deal with was more my question. And then, so Steve Lazarides spotted me, and he discovered Banksy. He's a big guy in the street art world, so JR as well was also discovered through him. And I was made gallery manager at 21 years old. We are going to start a hate campaign unless you wire us £500,000. So it was
what you?
Yeah. Here, I think it depends exactly on that mental stamina. Can you wait 20 years to see the first thing working out?
Marie, how are you?
Yeah, very well. Very pleased to be here. So comfy.
Hopefully we've made the environment nice and comfortable for you today. Lovely. Thanks so much for coming down. I mean, I'm super excited about today because this is our first podcast where we're talking about something that's very different from what we've normally done. Obviously talking about the art world and the work you've been doing in it, and we're going to go into so many details around it. But to start off, I've obviously spent a lot of time learning about you and what you've achieved so far in your career. But you're a business owner, you're an art expert, particularly in my eyes, you're an author and you're a creator, but you once called yourself the innovator of visual culture. Can you explain to me what that means?
Yes, just to say that was deemed on me. I did not call myself as such. I feel it's because the art world is a tiny niche market, 65 billion, which sounds like a lot, but when you think of your total cultural sector is 2.8 trillion. So that's all the things that we consume visually, gaming, entertainment, what you see on your streets through placemaking is much larger. So I think when we built the company, we didn't just want to disrupt the art world. We felt, how can we just make sure that arts are much more central to society? Because from a visual culture at large, from the 10,000 images you consume daily, only 1% of it is art. And I think that's why probably I was deemed innovator of visual culture, because it was not just the art world. It was, again, the positioning of the arts was in visual culture at large.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about the art world and kind of how that's moving into wider cultures as well and wider society. But I want to talk more about kind of where you started in the art space, because you've been in it for 15 years now.
Yeah.
And where did that all begin?
Doesn't make us look any younger. I was very lucky to start super early. I was 19 when I started. And I think to take a step back, I come from a tiny island off the west coast of France called Ile de Ré.
Beautiful.
There's 9,000 people a year.
Amazing.
I know, 5 people the same age at school. And my 2 parents are primary teachers. They're actually still primary teachers. I don't know how my mum does it. She's got like 30 kids as we speak. I do not know how you do it at 65 years old. But so a big shout out for all teachers for that reason. And I grew up with the most amazing scenery, like such a beautiful visual place to be in. No art whatsoever. I mean, the only thing you will see painted are a few birds and a bit of seaside there and there. Really? It's just, there's no art anywhere. But I felt so privileged and lucky for being in such a beautiful visual environment. And I was reading loads. I still read plenty. And I was reading about people who had these jobs as either writers or artists or politicians. So what was shaping, again, culture, the culture that we consume. And I thought, I want that. I want to be at those dinners. I want to be in those conversations. I want to comprehend how do you shape the content that you see. But I didn't know what kind of job that would be, because as you can imagine, the jobs were quite limited where I come from. So I applied to the BBC Culture Show with Andrew Grant Dixon at the time at the head of it. I wrote them a poem, which probably therefore was completely insane. And in the poem I said, which actually is quite sweet to think that at 19 I had the same vision as today, but I said, I see the arts are very much more interlinked. And I would like to be in a place that does that. And that's the reason I'm applying. I refused to do a motivational letter because I just thought that was not my thing. And I went on that internship. I was so proud. I was wearing my BBC little tagline, even on the weekends, just to show to everyone I was working at BBC. I was incredibly proud. And then I just felt those people have this as a job. They get to do it professionally. So I need to figure out, how do I get myself a job like this? Because that's what I want to do. I enrolled at Warwick University under a history of art. At the time, I had already done 2 years in France under philosophy. And
is that 2 years at university in France?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a special system that Napoleon created called the Grandes Écoles, where you do critical thinking, philosophy, historiography. It's a bit more complex than that, but quite hard to understand from a British perspective. And then I enrolled under history of art. And I was very lucky that I was spotted when I was as an intern at the BBC by an art dealer called Andrew Liberty, who said, during your school holidays, start working for me for the fairs and start covering the fairs. basically what he didn't say is that I will be doing everything because he would not be around. So you find me at 19. I literally had those very tall wellies, stripy tops, trying desperately to research on ArtNet, which was the only source of information about design and art and collectibles at the time.
Yeah.
Because I was on the stand selling like artworks and design for 200,000 pounds plus. And I was the only one on that stand. And
at 19.
Berkeley Square for the pad. And I had to figure it out. Yeah. And I did well. I did sell quite a few pieces, and that's how I got my first job under Steve Lazarides. We discovered Banksy at 21. But yeah, I was eagerly trying to read, and there was not much information on the internet. Still to this day, it's quite hard to figure out information.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like you're so driven by ambition at such a young age to take those chances and just keep driving towards something you wanted to do. Where do you think that came from?
I don't know if it's ambition or I just feel this is really interesting. And quite exciting, and I want to be in that room.
Yeah.
And then I just you paddle as a duck, you just paddle in and just think, how do I make it work? I think it's less thinking, I will be amazing. And it's more thinking that room sounds so cool and so interesting. And it was such an interesting room. Like when I was working for the pad, I got taken around by the most amazing art dealers, and for the first time saw the most amazing art collections, private art collections. And I mean, the amount of knowledge and exposure to knowledge I got was enormous and shaped a lot of where I am today. Yeah.
And so you did that for sort of 4 or 5 years before?
2 years.
2 years. And then what happened after that?
And then, so Steve Lazarides spotted me, and he discovered Banksy. He's a big guy in the street art world, so JR as well was also discovered through him. And I was made gallery manager at 21 years old.
Wow.
I also didn't have a clue about street art.
Say again?
I didn't have a clue about street art whatsoever. So we're back onto trying to research on anything on the internet, which again wasn't much because street art was just on the rise back then. And it was quite a different culture. Like, it's a very broad culture. As you can see, I have ballet pumps, and I'm not really your broad culture type. So I had to really kind of comprehend the codes of that culture. But what I loved about street art was that those artists, and you see it with Banksy recently, they don't just impact the art world, they are driving the conversation again outside of the art world. And that was my value system. So I was very pleased to be there because I was like, I want again to be part of visual culture, not just the arts. And Steve is shaping visual culture at large.
With street art, what's I guess all different forms of art, particularly in the kind of the world you work in, everything's different, right? It resonates with different audiences, as you're saying, and connects with different people. Yeah. With street art, what's the most difficult thing to understand about the true art? Because you're saying you had to go and research and learn about street art, but what were you actually doing? What was that process?
I think it's because, again, it's a broad culture. Realistically, a lot of street art was done illegally. So it's complicated.
Because Banksy was illegal for years, right?
Yeah. It's a lot of the artists we'll be working with will be doing things illegally on a regular basis. So I think, again, I was never driven to do something illegally, but that comes from a lower middle class background where you don't need to be doing anything illegally, realistically. So I think you're having to understand a very different mindset. If you're not given a voice, then sadly you're having to be illegal. I think it's changing because there's more public art, and they've actually enabled us to do more public art because they've broken those grounds. But it's a very different mindset. I think it's also understanding the processes, like spray paint and how does that work. Like some of what they were able to achieve with just a spray can and under such pressure of speed because you can't be caught, right? Is incredible. So it's a research of the technique per se. And I think, again, I just had loads of questions. I think, JR, the first ever piece he did was in the suburbs, in those huge council estates that were about to be destroyed in France. I think it exposed me, frankly, to things I had never thought about. And I love my job for that reason. I don't think I had considered what it meant to be living outside of Paris in this huge council estate and be completely taken off from the world of Paris and not integrated. And all of those artists made me think deeply about what that meant.
I mean, street art has such a massive impact in wider culture around the world, right? It's incredible. So, you were the gallery manager at 21. How long were you the gallery manager for?
2 years, because then I got poached. And
seems to get kind of headhunted quite a lot. It's a good sign.
Well, that's the early part of my career.
Yeah.
By an investor called Steph Sebag, who was an advertising magnate in the States. Yeah. So he had multiple advertising companies, and he wanted to open an art gallery. It was a cool thing to do in LA. He wanted someone to run it and build it for him. And 23, I said yes again. I mean, I had nothing to lose, is the answer.
Yeah.
Made tons of mistakes. I was clueless about what it meant to build a business, but that was ultimately my first venture.
Yeah.
And I landed in LA. And I think it's quite funny to think, again, what I love about those early experiences is I went from the part in Berkeley Square to the broad culture of street art to LA with like hand makeup and high heels every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing ever, because I think if I'm thinking of us today as the first big corp in the art world, we're kind of a mix of all of this. But it was all environments that I was just like, I had never thought about this environment ever. And I had never aspired to be in LA, but it was quite a cultural shock.
So in like 4 or 5 years, you went from having no professional experience within the art world
to extreme ones.
What got you there? What was the one thing that you think you did right to get to that point? Is it luck? I know people always put that down to it. Was it being in the right place? Was it always being around? What was the one thing that got you there in 4 years? Because in 4 years, you've achieved what most probably do in 10, 12, right?
I think I have a great friend, Christian Bush, who wrote Connecting the Dots as a book with Penguin, who's a great book. And I feel that for Steph Sebag, he had been talking to a few of the other galleries before he came to mine. The person at the reception barely addressed him. He was very American, where, you would chat to people at all times, I knew that when he came to us, I straight away chatted and exchanged books and things. So I'm not saying that's done to that, but I think I was open to opportunities. And I think Christian Bush talks a lot about it when he says, the idea of luck and unluck is also being wide open to where the opportunities could be and quickly grabbing it. I think also with these early years, it comes from accepting compromise. I was paid £25,000 as a gallery manager, which is peanuts.
And this when you're 23?
21.
21. Oh, this is before you moved.
I accepted a really low salary because I knew that job title could get me there. And I was living on a sofa bed in Putney back then. But really, I still can't comprehend how I actually slept so well on it, because now my back will be in pieces. But it's, but I feel it's the same with that first contract. It was not a good first contract with my first venture, but I felt like those are the years where I can compromise.
Yeah,
I don't have to assume for family. I don't have to assume for anyone but myself. I can compromise on how I will be supported financially and how I will be. It makes for a very difficult situation, I think, financially, because you're stressed financially as you're going through all of this. But that was what I accepted to do. But yeah, there's always going to be a compromise. I think they got me at 21, but they got me much cheaper and much more valuable than if I was a few years older, because I would have been like, absolutely not for that salary. And
it sounds like you just gave your all no matter what in those years. You were just completely dedicated.
I was happy to compromise and happy to still give 300%, because ultimately I knew that would not be long term.
Yeah. And did you have a plan at that point? Was there a plan in your mind at 21, 22? Or were you just kind of riding the waves?
But there was an idea that I needed to absorb content, because that knowledge could help me to do whatever I was to do later. I mean, ultimately, it's the same with the Berkeley Square experience of the pad, but all of those people are hard to reach and hard to download their knowledge on. Mm-hmm. So I was exposed to knowledge, and I knew, and I still believe that knowledge is power.
Yeah. And
that access to knowledge, and you said it, in our conversation, how difficult it is to access the art world. I was accessing an insider knowledge that was hard to access. I knew that was by far the most valuable thing across everything. It wasn't the job title. It wasn't the tap on the shoulder that you've done it. It was the fact that I was getting a knowledge that it would normally take much longer to get.
Yeah, it's like that idea of like learning or earning, right? You're either learning or you're earning. At that point, you were learning. Amazing.
I was definitely not earning much.
And so at 23, you're now doing the piece in LA.
Yeah.
You lived there for a period of time?
Yeah.
And how long were you there for?
So, I mean, it was such a weird situation with LA, because he got me this house, that was tiny house attached to his.
Right.
American, they work all the time, as we know. So at 6 a.m, he was just like, rock up into the house to just talk about strategy, which obviously for London, we would be like, whoa, what is this, And then this house was overlooking a tennis court, but what I forgot to do on my contract was to agree a salary for myself. So I actually was not paid, but I was invested onto a business. I could earn 50%,
right?
But I didn't pay myself, which is very stupid. Let's face it.
Got to learn.
Yes, lesson learned. But I had this ridiculous lifestyle. But if I wanted to afford a sandwich or anything, I would still be struggling. So it's just the contrast of LA was very intense. And of course, with LA, you have a lot more multimillionaires and billionaires. So you don't really have your middle class. It's quite extreme amounts.
Yeah.
But I was spotted by Michael Levitz because I thought he was probably thinking, she's so young and she's running this. It's quite an interesting character to be doing that. He asked to meet me. And again, that meeting changed a lot of things because he set up CA, one of the largest talent agencies in the world. He's known as one of the biggest, powerful brain of Hollywood. And back to absorb content, I understood that like I was going to be taught things that were going to be valuable for the next 30 years in that time. But it was a really weird time. I can't say it was pleasurable. I can't say I had a great time either.
Yeah.
But it's... But I understood again that it was the time when I had to learn and make all those sacrifices.
And how long were you in LA for?
2 years.
2 years. So you've lived in quite a few cities then, I guess, over the time, obviously being France. You talk a lot about how much you love London.
I love London.
I'm a big London fan. Obviously, I live here. But I also know that most people right now don't think London is what it once was, particularly from an economic perspective, particularly from, what's just going on in the world now. Why do you love London so much?
Okay, so I will caveat the fact that I have a great lifestyle in London.
Right.
And I totally agree that me arriving with no money and being able to be doing an internship while waitressing at Costa Coffee is not possible today. You couldn't live in Putney Zone 2 to do that on the Costa Coffee salary. So totally agree that for me as well, I am worried about the increased inequalities that you see in the country, especially in London. Now, why I love London, if you're able to afford something that is really nice for it, because it has the best of Europe and the States. It has the kind of the speed of business. You want to make something happen, you can contact a few people and you'll have a few of them that are like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And that is exciting and thrilling when you love making things happen. It's not like, let me put a meeting in a diary in 3 months' time. It's people are open for new opportunities and to make things move. Equally, you can walk around and have a little coffee shop, and I cycle everywhere. So I cycle my kids to school. Like, you have a very human approach. Most of the buildings are not very tall. So you feel part of something that's human, but you can still be making amazing things happen at fast speed.
Yeah.
The States for me feel almost too corporate and too machine-like. It's so big. And London feels still very human, but at that level of scale in terms of the market.
And I guess from where you were born and where you grew up, London must feel such a big contrast as well.
Yes, it does. Well, I mean, but this is no comparison. It's like, I think the two are just complete opposite places. But yes, in a sense, like also what I love about it is London is liberal. Like if you think of like the amounts of diversity of people that you see, it attracted someone like me to think we're liberal values that want to be in that city. That is quite special. I think we should again look to make sure we protect that. That this is a place where we've always been on the liberal side. We've always praised diversity. We've always praised creativity. It's one of the most powerful places for creativity. I think that's attracted loads of people from different places like me to think this will be home. Yeah.
Amazing. So after 2 years in LA, you come back to London.
Yeah.
And you start your agency. Start the business you have today.
I decided... I basically wanted to build what Michael had built. And I felt like this doesn't exist in the art world.
So you're kind of inspired by him, if you will.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally. Like, I felt all those talent agencies are building talents and ultimately basically building the content that you're going to consume daily. Like, it was the beginning of Kim Kardashian as well. I could see that, like, you were going to get exposed to her on every single channel. And
is this like 2012, 2013? Sorry, going.
Yeah, so the beginning of the rise of, just after Paris, it turned on to Kim Kardashian. And I just felt, how can visual artists have that level of power in terms of audiences? How can we shift this? Because right now, there's 2 people walking into my gallery a day, which is great, but it's very few. Whereas when those guys are speaking like a Kim Kardashian, they've got millions of people paying attention. And I want millions of people to pay attention to the arts. I decided to return to London because I felt this is where my network is at. And I also didn't feel comfortable receiving tons of money building a business, having not understood how to build one from scratch. I wanted to do the Lego block.
Yeah.
And I felt if I do a good job at the Lego block, then I can scale that Lego block. It felt superficial what I had in LA because it was a beautiful window and a beautiful Gary Will Melrose Avenue. We opened with Demi Moore. It was beautiful, but the economic model was not successful. Right. And it just felt like, I don't want to build that. I prefer to be on trainers and build something that works and then scale and be profitable from the start than something that looks so beautiful, but actually behind the scenes is not quite working out.
Yeah. And what was the mission day one? I know obviously you were kind of inspired by someone else to build your business you have today, but for you, what was the real purpose of the agency from its initial inception?
It was, how do you give a bigger voice to artists? How do you expand the agencies in the sector, which I'm very proud to say that 9 years later we've done. And obviously that's the topic of everything we discuss and which today.
Yeah. And why build an agency and not just operate by yourself, if that makes sense? Because it's obviously, I own an agency now today, and it's always a question that I often get asked is, why don't you just stay by yourself and be independent and be able to float into different things? For you, was there any thought process on that? Was it around building infrastructure, building team?
Yeah, I feel like I believe in teams. I think you can't do anything without a great team. I felt if it was done to myself, I would be limiting the idea, I'll be restraining the idea because I will be a limited resource. I've always wanted to go beyond me, in the sense that I found that if it comes down to me, then we've failed ultimately, because you want something to scale, you want something to spread as an idea. So I struggle with the idea that the idea would rely just on me.
Yeah. And some of the first artists that you must have engaged in those early days, what was that like, kind of getting that first connection with someone?
I think what I'm so lucky is a lot of them are still with me today.
Really?
And I still don't understand how they said yes, because I feel like a total lunatic. I was cycling around telling them this grand vision, but I was sleeping on different sofa beds of friends. I didn't have, it must have felt so random, but they trusted me. And it was bold. I think that I went from looking so pristine on magazines and looking so glamorous at that gallery to saying honestly that I was broke and I was on that bicycle trying to redo things, So it was definitely a bold move, but they trusted me, which I'm forever grateful. I've had a lot of backup quite early on into those early years. I still don't understand why, because I must have said so many things that were so stupid. But it's just so somehow, maybe that was the passion and the bicycle and the energy, but they believed in me.
Do you think, what was it that they believed in? Was it that passion? Because you speak about it a lot, and obviously for up to this point, 4 or 5 years, you've just been in the space, really trying to find and learn throughout that process.
Yeah.
Going to those initial artists, were you kind of selling them the dream, or were you saying, I'm going to be on that journey with you? What was it?
Yeah, I feel I was always cautious to oversell. And that's always something that I've said to my teams. I don't want to oversell. I'm always very cautious in saying what we're going to get for them, because it's hard otherwise, because your expectations are very high. And if something doesn't go, basically with talents, you can care deeply about them. And actually the timing in which to make things happen can be much longer than you had expected. But I think I deeply cared, and I would not let something go easily. I would really fight for things. I still fight for things. And I still have this burning fight in my stomach is a way to describe it, that I would want my artists to win deals, and I would want them to inspire people. And because a lot of them also fight for causes that are much bigger than them. We spoke about Raven de Clark, who last week it was all over the press, but she is the first artist to open that sculpture park dedicated to readdressing how do we depict slavery, an enormous topic that is so under-addressed in our public space. Raven is working class. She has so little odds to be getting that level of contract. She's 27. My stomach was fighting in for this, and this is probably what they saw, is that it was bigger than the deal. Is I want her to get it because I think historically it's meaningful, and I think it's meaningful at large that she gets it. And is that anger, but no anger directed at people, but anger to make it happen, because I think it's unfair that people like her haven't been represented before.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk more about the industry and the challenges there. But one thing I just want to ask you about the agency and the business you built is, I imagine building the team, just going back to that, and building the right people in the business is a real big part of it being successful, right? Yeah. Because you're in a very niche space, in a niche environment, doing something that isn't really being done. I'm sure you don't have hundreds of competitors that are also, representing talent. How do you attract the right team? How do you look at that? I
mean, I think that I would happily turn back the question to you on this, because I think team and hiring is an ongoing learning curve. Yeah. You can hire too early. You can go, the right person with the right experience actually just isn't the right fit for the company culture you've built. It's an ongoing science on how you go about things. I feel I have a lot of team members I'm incredibly proud of. I was able to recruit true entrepreneurs who had exited their companies. So Liz built the first fractional ownership platform in Europe.
Wow.
I know, and she did that when she was 19.
Wow, is
classic. But I never would dream of thinking that she would want to work for us.
Yeah.
And so when she exited the business and sold it successfully, she then joined me. Jan, after 25 years of building his own creative agency, also joined me. So I think those two hires really changed a lot of the way in which we operate as a business. I have loads of corporate hires I'm really proud of. I have actually loads of junior hires I'm very proud of. All my team are shareholders in the business.
Amazing.
And that's done so that even your junior can feel that they're earning capital. But I've also made tons of mistakes, and I think hiring mistakes is the worst because it makes everyone miserable. You miserable, them miserable. Then you're having to go through the whole process of the split. It's just horrendous, I feel. And no one prepares you for that. And also, like, you're having to really try and increase your emotional intelligence when you're actually still very young and you're still developing that for yourself, realistically. So there's no special formula, but I'm very proud of what we've built.
I mean, you should be, for sure. What do you think is the one learning you have taken from hiring and that process? Is there something that sits with you that has really been that main? I mean, I've got a few things in my mind, but that main thing that you always address in your hiring process when building your team that goes, this is how we ensure we've got the right talent on day one?
I mean, there's so many. Due diligence, I feel you can never do enough due diligence. It's madness where people will go out there and you could have actually cracked it if you had done the better due diligence. And I failed sometimes to do that. And I did end up with quite a lot of issues having not done that. It's interesting because I probably am really great at recruiting talents because talents are like entrepreneurs.
Yep.
So I actually really understand them. I understand that you would care so deeply that you want that to happen. I think employees, you see, like my best two hires were those two entrepreneurs. But I feel at large, therefore, I'm not the best recruiter because it's a very different mindset.
Yeah.
Acknowledging this already is good. Like, I don't think my instinct is the top one for employees. I think my instinct for talents is very good.
Yeah.
Because in a sense, we're actually more similar.
Do you feel that your team, and, you know, I don't know how you'll think about this question, but the passion for the space must be quite important in terms of the team working at the agency, really being passionate about the art world and the industry. It must be a really important metric in that hiring process, or is it not?
I think, well, it's interesting. I mean, I hope it is, but the reality is your passion is going to be tested big time because you are the person that makes the magic happen. So you're the one that's dealing with all the stuff going wrong.
Yeah.
You are exposed to why the magic goes wrong every 5 seconds. So I feel this is actually probably also one of the years of learning is loads of people want to be part of the company for what the external profile of the company looks like. They want to attend the events and be there as we cheer for the project's launching. But as we all know, that's like 2% for the rest of the company because you're the one making sure it happens and you have loads of stress at the financial level and at the logistics level and at the production level. And so I feel that is really spotting who actually wants the appearance more than the existence of that project is probably what we're still working on. And the passion, you could be someone that adores the arts, but actually working in it will destroy your passion for it.
It's so true.
Very different. Yeah. It's very different. Like I adore ballet and I dance like 4 times a week, but I'm sure being exposed to all the behind the scenes will probably not be a good thing in me having it as a hobby, you know? So it's very different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's this fine line of passion, right? It can be a passion of a career or it can be a personal passion. And sometimes
hobby.
If you dive in too much to a personal passion, it ruins so much for you, you know? Has there been a moment in kind of building a business that's almost 10 years old is an amazing achievement, and I know how hard that can be to do that. I feel like I'm getting older every time that's said to me, but But I know there's been so many highs and lows to that, and that process. And I think for me, there's been a few moments where maybe I wanted to quit, but they're very rare, and that's always kind of driven me through. Has there been that moment for you? I wouldn't be surprised if there hasn't.
Yeah.
But
I mean, tons of challenges.
Yeah, what has been the biggest challenge for you as an individual looking at the business side?
I feel it was less whether or not I wanted to quit, but whether or not I was equipped to deal with the challenge that we had to deal with was more my question. I was pregnant with my second son a year and a half ago. We just made it on the Times list for being one of the fastest growing company in the UK.
Amazing. Massive congrats.
Thank you. As you know, you report very big numbers, which are your valuations. Again, very different to what you have in your bank account.
Yeah.
And in your turnover.
Yeah.
Again, very different to your profit margins.
Mm-hmm.
And
everyone sees the big numbers first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I do not have this amount of money under my bed. I to clarify this. But I feel this probably got people quite excited about the amounts of money we were making.
Yeah.
And 3 ex-consultants we had hired to test the market in France. So 5 months, 4 months, and 2 months were the times that they had spent with us. They were not performing. We ended their contracts. And they said, we are going to start a hate campaign unless you wire us £500,000. So it was
on you?
time. Yeah. And my C-suite, who was in the room. And that was the first time that I was blackmailed at that level. And we obviously said no, but they did start the hate campaign. So what they did is that they basically went on an account in France called Denounce Your Agency, and they just filled it with lies. But most importantly was death threats, rape threats, I hope you lose your baby, and it was targeting my whole team. Now, and going individually, like one of my colleague Blue is partially deaf, that was like made completely like attacked against her. So I think when I meant I didn't know I was equipped with it, it's because for the first time I was like, what if Blue breaks down?
Yeah.
Like, I can't look at myself in the mirror that I have built a company that has made someone break down. Like, it's a total different thing than saying, hey guys, let's motivate ourselves to ultimately make a difference and make great projects happen. To, I am responsible for someone breaking down. It's same with a child that you carry. I didn't want to be responsible for my child to be born with anxiety.
Yeah.
Which obviously will be, I would feel the guilt endlessly that I've generated that. So I feel it was a fast crash course in many things. One, in vulnerability, because I was taught very early on, if you don't lead this with vulnerability with your team and anyone around you, you will start having internal conflicts. And I went from, I've been mentored by men all in their 50s, to be someone that was so crap at being vulnerable, to having to walk in that room being like, guys, I'm scared emotionally. I feel sick and quite vulnerable, but we're going to have to work through that together, which was, for me, personality-wise, quite a stretch, because I am not someone that will go and do that. And then mental health-wise, I had to put a full program together for my team, including for myself, on ways to cope with high amount of stress. And that was not looking at our phone past 6 p.m., completely logging off on the weekend, making sure all of us exercised. I mean, we've never been so fit. If you look at my team, we are so fit, because it was just making sure we could cope. Because what you don't know about these things is how long it's going to last. You're entering a marathon. You don't have a date to end it. But you're hoping your body and your brain are going to cope with it. And that is the hope that you have to carry it. And I think for the first time I was like, I don't know if I have it. I don't know if I have the stamina to deal with that situation. I could put all the resources behind me to make sure I can.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm not confident, because I will never be confident about mental health, because mental health, as we all know, is not something you can bet on. You don't know how far your mental health can go. And obviously there's different phases of your life. So for us, we're lucky that the team is very strong. We're super tight. No one left. It made us really and our company continues to strive. And I feel, in a way, now it's a positive, because, we had more people wanted to invest in the company, more companies to back us, because people were watching how we were handling that situation. It was a crash course also in learning the amounts of biases you have against female leaders. Because I think for me, that was such a shock. I feel to kind of realize the hate you could receive, I think, from that front, which I've turned on to many things. A TED talking about visual biases, because that's my expertise as a visual author. And I don't just talk about gender. It's social economics, it's ageism, it's racial, it's religious. There's so many levels of visual biases we'll be exposed to daily that would then go and make us hate certain types of people. So making sure we tackle that more, and that art can be a part of this. And I've also been behind some reports, like the recent one with Signal AI, was a great company, on gender biases, and helping funding the research and helping making sure that we tackle this. So I'm a very well-informed person on that topic. I can redirect you to many academics if you ever need to read papers on this. And I'm just so glad. My second baby is the happiest kid ever. He's like super Buddha-like. So, because I just was so obsessed about, like, I can't have anxiety in him. But yeah, I'm now doing 4 times a week ballet, the fittest tennis and swimming player ever. And like, it's just ridiculous at this stage, because I just was so concerned. Yeah. And I was like, anything that will make me focus, not look at my phone. And yeah, so I'm a very active sport person now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry you went through that, because that I mean, I think you're talking about the cusp of actually probably what happened, which is completely fair.
Yeah, except for the caps.
Yeah, there must have been a lot of detail in that. But how did it come to an end, if you don't mind me asking? Did it just stop one day and you knew you could move on, or what happened?
Yeah, so I feel we did it in a few things. My core priority was, 1, mental health. Make sure we last. Second is that the business thrive. I'm 70% shareholder. The rest are team and investors. If we could choose to thrive financially, we will be able to be empowered economically to then continue to fight this kind of injustice.
Yeah.
Third is that we will sue, and we're in the process of that as we speak, against damages, because obviously, like, that level of death threats is not acceptable. And then fourth is, alongside this, is education-wise, we're educating people about this. I think if the idea is that if the business was to strive, I would then going to become an ambassador for other people in that situation. When it happened to me, I got so many phone calls on that first day with women and all types of people saying, we've gone through that. But I was like, guys, like,
really,
you need to talk about it.
So when it all came out, obviously it was a big release, and
literally
people,
female leaders telling me this is common, and I was like, okay, well then, and people were like, well, you can't talk about it because it would distract, and I was like, no, because that's the point, is that I need to know it's there,
for sure, because
then we need to prepare. Like, I'm someone that likes to prepare if something is actually out there. So then I just felt, well, I will become someone that will speak openly about it.
Yeah. Was there any point in that process that you wanted to stop and close the door?
No, but I was concerned that I could make it. I think mentally I was like, I don't know if I'm strong enough. So it was more, I think for the first time I was like, I don't know if I have it in me to go through that period. Yeah. And I didn't have the answer. No one could give me the answer. What's interesting is your entourage, one, is hurt by this deeply. I think something that you're not prepared for is how cocooned and loved, but also hurt the entourage will be for you. Yeah. And they become the shield of this. But the second is how they believe in you. There was not a single inch of my investors moving, or anyone that was like, it's not going to work out. Amazing. So they are believing in you more than you believe in yourself in that period of time.
That must drive you forward so much in that.
Yeah, it was incredible. Like, it just, yeah. Frankly, I think it's, the reason I think I have no trust issues whatsoever is because I have seen people going out of their way for that whole period to make sure that we were okay. And that actually made me believe in human beings more than ever, because it's your entourage who is doing the hard work. They almost like cocooning you and just going out of their way.
Yeah. Well, well done for getting through it. And it sounds like there's still a little bit happening in the background with it all, but
yeah, I mean, I think you have to address it. And the thing is, let's not forget that I am a privilege, because now I'm very privileged financially, white, middle class, but now I'll be much more upper middle class than middle class. So I have resources to fight that. So there's a duty, once again, for anyone who is in the privilege of power to make sure that you are the voice for someone who might not have those resources. This is costly to survive something like this. Yeah. Someone that might not be in my position from a privileged perspective might not be able to fight it. So I feel if you are in the room, that you need to just make sure somebody else can get in. Yeah. Somebody else might not get past that.
So true. There's so many people who must have to, that must be almost the end, you know?
The business will go down.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the art industry. I'm super excited for this because I have very limited knowledge of the art industry. So I'm excited to learn from you a little bit more today. My first real question, I think, is do you believe the art world, let's call it, is misunderstood by bigger societies of what it actually is and what it takes and what purpose it serves?
I think the art world likes to be misunderstood. I always compare it to the first time you read the FT and you almost cry out of tears because you don't understand the first page, right? Yeah. And I feel, especially during the weekend is easier. But it's because it wasn't built so that you understand it. It was built so that you can be an insider. Yeah. And the more it's mysterious, the harder it is to comprehend, the more it's reinforcing insiders ultimately. So I think it worked on two ways. They did not want to be understood. And ultimately then audiences did not understand them. Now the problem is museums report that only 1 out of 5 people in the UK go and visits galleries and museums. And now everyone is like, well, actually there's a lack of funding. There's a lack of audiences. No one cares. But I'm like, well, of course no one cares, because we've made it so that it would be very hard to ultimately comprehend it. And I'm a big Einstein believer that a brilliant idea is something that you can easily explain. Those press releases that you read in the art world with literally 5 incredibly long words following each other is ridiculous. Like it doesn't have to be that. So I feel they are currently in a transition, the art world. We started that transition a few years back, so obviously we're much more comfortable with it. As you can hear, we already passed that. But we're helping them and helping quite a few groups within the art world making that transition. And I'm excited. I feel like the visual language is one of the most accessible language, actually, because 65% of us are visual learners. So most of us are visual learners. Unless you're blind, you'll get bored with it. This is an easy one to interact with. But then you've been made believe that this is one of those incredibly complex things that you need to be incredibly clever about everything that you say, when it's not. You can respond to visual language. You can engage emotionally. You can understand those ideas. And I'm excited for that to happen.
Do you think wider audiences understand what, I use the word good very lightly, but good art means, what good art is? Do you think that's a part of this? Well,
I don't even think that's a question. I feel, not to challenge your brilliant questioning so far, but it's more, I don't think it's about taste. I think it's about wanting to participate. Ultimately, the visual world should be a democratic space. And that's what we want to back. It's a place where all of us feel we could have a voice. You might find something there that you like and you want to see more. Brilliant. I might think differently. But if all of us participate, that's how we get a really exciting, diverse, creative space. Right now, 90% of the art world comes from privilege, means ultimately very few people get to participate. So I think let's put aside what's good and bad, because I think it's very hard to judge taste. My taste might be different to yours. But I think let's more focus on how can we make sure that everyone wants to participate? Because the truth is, when I'm on public art, committees or meetings trying to decide what goes on the streets that's going to be seen by thousands of people, no one turns up to those meetings. No one cares. So I think beyond thinking what's good and bad, let's just start with people caring.
Why do you think no one cares?
Because they were not encouraged to start with. They were told it's not their thing. Art education was only... I love them telling you off for all of these things. But of course you should do that. No, it's just because, as you know, I care enormously about
I love it. I mean, generally I love it because I think you're so right when I think about it. From my perspective, the closest thing to art really is photography and videography, but I've always done that commercially. We were speaking about this before we recorded, right? And I could understand, there's some in the studio now, like photography, I love it. I can understand what good looks like from my perspective, but the deeper side of art, I've always been like, I don't know enough if I like or I don't like. Do you know what I mean? I think there's that piece, right?
But I think that's where I challenge your idea of taste here, because if you think of education, your private schools all have art educations. Your state school don't all have it, as we know. Then 4 out of 5 billboards in the UK are in working class areas, which means I live in the privileged areas. I have tiny shop art and nature. If I was in the working class area, I would be constantly targeted with commercial imageries and billboards, right? Our visual environments are not equal. So putting it onto taste means that, like, I woke up one day and I'm just brilliant and I just know what's right. I've obviously been in the sector for 15 years to kind of learn the rows of it. But on top of this, I've been specifically in an environment that informed me of this with the knowledge that we discussed earlier in our podcast. So it's this is why I think it's misleading, because we are forgetting the deep social inequalities amongst the visual environment we'll grow up in, around the price of education in this country and in other countries, and ultimately the exposure that your parents will bring to you. Like my kids, my kids are constantly exposed to the arts and culture, so I think for them it will be like casual to be walking in that environment and express their opinion. They probably think like, I must express my opinion. But I think if it's an environment you've never encountered, and then you're suddenly walking into this incredibly intimidating place when you're told you can only have complex words to talk about it, but you're not going to express your opinion.
Yeah, for sure. How hard is it to be a successful artist, even in any country, in any city?
I think it's incredibly hard. I think it's much harder than an entrepreneur. And I have a huge amount of respect for them, because I think your odds, my odds are small. Our odds are small.
Yeah.
But at least we are betting it on a portfolio of talents from my end and ideas. So if one talent is not working out, there's another 3 that might be working out.
Yeah.
They're only solely betting on themselves. It's an insanely risky thing to do.
And for those that don't know, because I think the big thing from a kind of creative arts, if you will, a lot of people know there's, being an actor is very hard and being an entrepreneur is very hard, but you've just got to keep on doing it and work part-time jobs, etc. But I feel like artists, it's not really spoken about as much. Everyone knows a few artists, but they don't know how many are never discovered or completely undiscovered. To start from your very early stages of your artistic career to get to even a small amount of success, you must have seen it time and time again, that journey happen. How tough is that for them? Yeah,
I feel this is a thing that we don't control as talent agents. We don't control the timing. Right. Because, like I mentioned, Raven was 27, and this week I just announced that one of ours is going to exhibit in the gallery that always exhibited to Hockney. And those are quite young. And I got quite a few young talents who they've been doing it for years, but they've done really well. That's something that I cannot control, is how long it would take for people to really embrace the artist. And therefore we go back to mental stamina, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Is that this is when you ask me, like, for the first time, did I think I could get past that? And I was like, well, I don't know how much mental stamina I have versus that situation. Here, I think it depends exactly on that mental stamina. Can you wait 20 years to see the first thing working out? Because that's really the question. Yeah. Are you going to be able mentally, financially, resources-wise, to be able to wait 20 years if it needs to take 20 years? And that's the answer that sadly sometimes you have to answer.
Do you think a lot of artists give up too soon?
I don't think that they give. I would never put it
give
on
up.
them.
I mean, they have to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I feel like the financial realities with a crisis of our cost of living, and the fact that you would want to quit is totally fair. I would never judge that decision. I feel sometimes, yes, it might be too soon for the career. Yeah. But again, balance of life and career, I kind of, if you want a life as well, I kind of understand that. So I feel there will be no judgment for my part, but I feel the sacrifices are huge.
And how do you think artists can sort of survive through those early struggles of finding their voice and finding who they are? Is there something that you've seen that's been a massive impact in that, if that makes sense? Yeah,
I think if I look at mine, so I think it's a few things. There's a wealth of friendships and network and entourage. I mentioned it for me, but that is what makes a difference. It's to be loved. It sounds really stupid, but I think you're born to want to be loved.
Yeah.
And if you have that cocoon of a network that just constantly says, you go, we believe in you, I think, frankly, this can make you do amazing things in life, because you're constantly going to have someone that's going to take that call with you and push you that little extra. I see the strengths of the entourage and them understanding the value of relationships, making them very successful.
Yeah.
The second thing is mental stamina. I think, unfortunately, some who have been dealing with things that were quite tough life-wise have a better mental stamina, but they are sadly better prepared for something that's going to be harsh. And I can think of a few of mine who, therefore, when in a difficult situation, I think, the way you handle pressure and stress develops over time. And in fact, the more you handle it, the better you get at it. It's the best muscle. But in a way, therefore, someone who's been more challenged early on has got a good muscle going. So they will be able to tackle a hard situation. Someone who is very privileged, however, will also have a very powerful contact book that's going to back them.
Yeah. Do you think that for early stage artists, if you will, it's down to them to start building followings as well? Because I know that's a big thing. Well, I'm assuming that's a big thing within the art world, that having a following organically that you've built up before any kind of exposure or galleries start to, be interested in you is really important. I suppose with social media today and the opportunity to reach new audiences around the world, it's easier than it was 10 years ago even. Is that a real key thing for early stage artists to try and develop that following and engagement and, I guess, influence?
Yeah, maybe you will probably say the same thing for your business, but I think it's more community that matters. I feel today you have to build communities to be successful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just gone through that with the launch of my book, where you're literally having to ask every single person in your entourage to back it, right? It's just so embarrassing as well, because you're like, please buy the £17 book for me, because it will help me in the numbers, right? But I feel we are now at the stage where community really matters. And whatever type of community you build, this is very likely how you can be successful. And people now don't want to take risk and invest tons of resources unless you already are showing skill sets of building community. I am sure that Penguin looked at my community and felt we will invest also because she has a strong community.
Yeah. What do you, in the art world generally, what do you think one of the biggest issues are in terms of bringing new talent into it? Is there something there that isn't quite working, of finding new talent, giving opportunity to new talent? Is there something there that you think is missing?
Well, with any place that's not diverse, ultimately you don't relate to someone that's different to you. I think we go back to a lot of our work in terms of biases, but people who are very different to you feels almost not human. They dehumanize quite easily because you don't understand how they mind things or how they go about things. And that's how you end up having loads of divides in society, ultimately. And so I think by not understanding someone, you might not understand behavior. You might not understand what they talk about. I think something that was really hard with the art world when I entered it is, especially when you're broke and trying to build a business, is everyone is very light with a glass of champagne on this opening at night. Again, not saying it's bad to drink champagne. I'm just saying you're having a really difficult day at work, and then you're having to be really fluffy and light and talk about the weekends and really like light things. Well, actually, you're feeling super heavy because you're feeling stressed financially. You don't know if your company is going to go bust or not, and. But you are in a world that's does not relate to this. Like most of those businesses, their parents would have given in $500,000 to start it, so they're not going to relate to you literally struggling for every penny as they started. So it's being relatable is something that's problematic because you will get people to behave in a way that people will find weird and bizarre and different. I think also the topics that they would want to challenge, when you're again quite different, you might think about things quite differently. So you might enter the art world with different ways of seeing the world. And that again might not be understood because the main way to think might be very different. Your priorities, your social values might be completely different. And just don't forget that the way someone gives you a leg up is because they connect with you. They feel that they understand you. But again, that's really hard if they can't relate to you.
I've always this is a bit of a personal question from my side, from just understanding art as much as I can. Why do audiences connect with art that's from, Picasso and Da Vinci and all these artists, right? Why do people connect with them from such a long time, period ago now? What's that connection and why does that resonate?
I mean, there's many different answers, because I think also people have been told this is Picasso and it's worth millions.
Is that why? Because that's kind of my question.
One of the reasons, but I feel like there's a brilliant podcast, Legacy, with my friend Afro who's doing it, and there's 5 episodes as we speak on Picasso, and I was like, oh, Picasso again. But actually I listened to the 5 episodes and I was like, the guy is bloody fascinating. He is. And he was doing it at so many different historical points that really matters. Like, it's really interesting recently, some of his paintings were banned when talking about war because the Guernica painting was really challenging the idea of war. So you see that it's much deeper, that he still challenges people to this day. So I feel that's, in my head, the importance of the arts is to raise questions that are hard to raise, but to get as many people in the room possible. Now, the fact that Jay-Z also mentioned it probably means that people, because it's part of pop culture, so they're like, I listen to Jay-Z, so I'm going to also look at my Picasso, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think let's not forget that those paintings have also fascinated and triggered. Triggers is good.
Yeah.
That means there's something deep down in them that is still relevant to our human condition, and pop culture.
Yeah, because I think pop culture is really interesting on this, right? Because the reason why I asked you that question is I'm trying to understand why some artists break into the mainstream space and audiences and some artists don't. Is it the price? Is it the hype? Is it the pop culture? What is it? Is it the fact that they're hundreds of years old and there's history associated with it? And how can artists now use those tools to kind of go to the next step, i.e. Damien Hirst of the world, etc., who have blown up and made such, amazing art, and people very much respect it and have followings to that. What is it that makes him special? That's what I'm trying to find. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And I think that is visual storytelling in my head, where the art world traditionally relates to artists' objects. We built a company to build visual storytellers. When you do a podcast, you connect with another human being. And we all want to connect. This is ultimately the bottom line. You want to be inspired by stories. And someone will tell you their stories and you'll be like, you know what, because that was inspiring, I'm going to try that. And I'm going to lean into this new way of thinking. Visual storytelling is much more effective, in fact, because we register so much more of visual. 60% of what we register is visual, much more than sound, actually. And that shapes how we behave. Like, if you think about what you consume, even on your commute to work, that's completely shaped what you think you should desire, or how you think of yourself, or how you act. So we are deeply in need of visual storytellers, and we believe visual storytellers. And that's why ultimately you get such a connection with certain artists, because they've made it onto priorities at large that we all share. I go back to Picasso, but the paintings were challenging war when people ultimately were going through this. So that was something that, irrelevant of the art, they could connect with.
The sort of digital art craze being NFTs and that world, I've really wanted to kind of get your opinion there on what you thought of that, because a lot of people are now seeing that as an art form in its own way. How do you see it?
I think, for me, whatever the medium, as long as you're a good storyteller, I don't mind. I've never cared about mediums. I care about impact onto the audiences. We're so audiences driven as a business that my focus is much more, can we move you? Yeah. Can you be moved by this? Can you be emotionally touched? Can you learn something from this? Can you connect with this? However medium you use, we have brilliant AI artists who are doing it brilliantly. We have NFT artists who are doing it brilliantly. We have amazing painters and sculptors. I don't care about the medium. I think you should obviously be incredible technically with that medium. But we talked about spray cans earlier and the street art experience. It doesn't matter. But make sure your medium is, again, the best medium for that storytelling. Yeah.
And do you think that with that kind of NFT digital, and I guess you mentioned AI as well, which is kind of turning into its own art in its own way, do you feel that there's longevity in that? Because I think that one thing for me with, I know you're not that fussed about the platform and the medium as such, but for me with digital art, I think there's a different way of looking at it over a longer period of time. Like, I'm interested to see where that goes in the next couple of years, even 10, 20 years, in terms of how it lasts. Like, we talk about Picasso a few times here, but like, from his perspective, art's hundreds and hundreds of years old, but it will be. Whereas the digital stuff, do you think it's got longevity in it, or is it a lot of noise?
It's about the longevity, and it's more about, do I think it's necessary that artists engage with the medium? For instance, for AI, right now AI is literally amplifying enormous amount of visual biases. So if you ask OpenAI or Midjourney, two of the main AI models, who is a caring person in our society? You don't have a single picture of men, just women. So you cannot be caring because you're not represented as being caring. And this will be amplified massively, because by 2050, 75% of the images we look at will be AI generated. So I want
70%.
I know, 75.
75.
Even worse. So I feel therefore like artists have to engage with it, because for instance, if you are asking the AI to tell you about what happened before the colonization, you have this actually bad caricatures of savages, which are deeply racist. So I have quite a few artists like Delphine Diallo who are specifically working to input and change our data sets and have new types of visual storytelling. Yeah. Because if that's going to be the core, the heart of our information, like if you think now, you consult a lot of our news through social media, you're going to do that using AI. Like, that will be the representation we have of ourselves. Artists and creatives have to therefore input a lot into the tools. So I think it's not about even thinking will this last or not? It's more thinking we have to get involved, because the storytelling that is currently pre-existing is very concerning in terms of biases.
Why is it concerning?
Because it's full of sexism, ageism, racism. It's right, left, and center. So you're just having to make sure that you challenge that.
And that leads us nicely onto the book in some ways, The Visual Detox, which only came out recently?
2 weeks ago.
Amazing. How's that been?
We're mad. I haven't slept in days.
I think we spoke last week.
My voice.
We spoke last week and you were in Dublin and you'd been somewhere else before. So firstly, congrats, because it's amazing to launch something. You've launched it with Penguin as well, which is, I'm sure, amazing achievement for you. So massive congrats. Firstly, what made you write the book?
So the book is actually the vision at large that I've always had before even starting the company, on how do we get again everyone in the same room to be involved in the visual arts, and going back to, from the 10,000 images we consume daily, 95% of them are commercial, only 1% is art. I'm not saying let's abolish commerce, but how do we balance out? Like, is it right that we start our days with just commercial imagery? Do we not want to diversify that a little bit more? And that was always at the heart of ultimately what got me up in the morning. I wanted to find an amazing publisher for that. Yeah. Someone that would give me a voice to be mainstream. It was hard. Writing a book is hard. I mean, running a company is hard. So we obviously haven't gone for easy things so far. But I'm really pleased it's done. And I'm really pleased so many people from all walks of life are embracing it as we speak.
And what is the visual detox?
Visual detox is informing you that you're consuming imagery endlessly, and that shapes your brain. And actually, we always think of imagery as quite fluffy and entertaining and not really kind of getting to your brain. But actually, it's the total opposite. It's what shapes most of your subconscious. And what's nice about the recent social neuroscience studies is that we've been able to demonstrate that your brain is fully affected by the images that you see daily. So therefore, how do you participate in this, and how do you shape to be in a world that visually must represent to you? And ultimately makes you happier as well, because the mental health crisis is linked to us constantly being exposed to images we don't want to be exposed to.
What do you think that there's going to be change soon around that? Because obviously the mental health, as you mentioned, has been a big topic for a couple of years. Ever since we were at COVID, that's kind of, elevated it a lot, and there's lots of conversation. And I feel like screen times and time on social platforms, everything's there's lots of conversation happening there. Do you think that there is a want and need from a lot of audiences to change that, but there's a never-ending battle?
I think there's little awareness on the impact of visuals on you. Were you aware of the 10,000 images a day?
I think I would be, because of what we do. I think that's the only thing I would say, because obviously for us, we're building, at 303, we must make hundreds of creatives a week that we distribute across multiple clients.
But do you not find this super overwhelming?
I think so, yeah. And to be honest, I think in researching you and speaking to you before this and today, I think it's very much opening up my brain to think, right, actually, we are part of the problem in some ways. We all are, for sure. But I think also we, from an ad perspective, from a commerce perspective, we make multiple versions of assets that we pump through social platforms with an objective, a commercial objective to it. Yeah. I think that a lot of brands now are trying to make more value and build impact and community. I love what you said about building community, because I think that is the way to go from a brand perspective as well as obviously from an artistic perspective. But it is scary, and there is a lot. And I think that for me, what we do in advertising is basically trying to get people to really hook onto that dopamine. That's what we're looking for. The social platforms are giving you that release and giving you that hit, which is what we talk about, which is so scary in so many ways, right? And I think that art, from my kind of experience with it, how it feeds into that kind of dopamine is kind of what I think is quite interesting. Because for example, I love film. So I watch loads of films and I enjoy that. I watch the same film over and over again. I don't need a complex story. I just need simple narrative with a bit of action and I'm sold, right? Yeah. So my intellect isn't that high for what I need to get that kind of dopamine, if that makes sense. And that's what I would call kind of my main art that I resonate with from that perspective. That's but when I watch a film, I care about how it's lit. I care about what it looks like because of what I do and done for 10 years. So, but when it comes to social, I fall out of love with platforms all the time. I'm just I'm seeing the same thing time and time again. I think from the brand side and the work that I do, there is more going into how can we educate, learn or inspire, as opposed to, I think, to be honest, pre-COVID, where it turned into very kind of robotic sell, if that makes sense. So going back, the long answer to your question is the 10,000 images is scary. It's a lot. But I think that the way that we're consuming what those images are, particularly from an algorithm perspective on social, is really what we resonate with, right? We're shown what we connect with more, which is very difficult for artists because we can't put, it's more difficult, I believe, for artists to put what's going to connect with people if they don't fully understand it. If you're trusting and tying new artistic things, it's very hard. I mean, we were talking about, I forgot the gentleman's name, but one of your artists. Incredible. I mean, you were saying Will Smith just shared his content and like that looks fantastic. Like I was looking through it last night actually, like this is incredible. I know I'm going to get served more of his content now. That makes sense. But if I wasn't speaking to you today, I wouldn't have found him. And that's what I think the problem is from a social perspective.
So there's many answers to unpack from this. I think one, you're showing accountability from the sector perspective, which I feel all of us being part of the problem have to be accountable. And it's not, again, to say we have to erase commerce, but like, for instance, we're a B Corp. You can have ethical value systems as you're still operating within the world of economics, you know? So, and it's comprehending what if ultimately the impact I'm doing on the audiences that are going to watch this, and really kind of study that and make sure that you are thinking about this carefully. There's also an age perspective, like skincare ads. I've just been, last week it was a lot of the headlines that is constantly advertised on 8-year-old girls, so I think an ethics on what kind of visuals to whom, and ultimately the impacts that this will have on that kind of brains, because we all know the brain is still not formed at that age and will continue to be formed right until your late 20s. So that will have a very different impact than me at 34 now, who is actually quite formed, and therefore will have very different ways to engage with that content. Interestingly enough, digitally, you said it, you can be aware enough that you start feeding your algorithm with things that actually make you mentally happy. I compare it a lot with food, because if I eat one Haribo, I want to eat the whole packet, right? It's a very addictive thing, and I love Haribos. But ultimately, it's the same with anything that you consume. You can know what's good for you, and actually you do know what's good for you deep down. And of course, there are days I crash on the evening and I just want some Haribos, and we all like this, and you just go through the whole packet of Jaffa cakes. But it comes to a point that, like, that's going to make you crash, and if you were a bit sad, you're going to give an even more sad in an hour time. That's kind of similar here, where the content that visually feels like, you have to have it because you already know in a great mental place, we all know in an hour time will make you even more crap. So just self-awareness matters. I think at a teenager level is much harder. At our age, we can do it. Like, we can be like, look, like, this is making me not great. So I have to not eradicate it, but control it. And it's really a book about taking back control. The problem I pose is that actually your phone and apps is a bit harder, because apart from you constantly trying to train the algorithm against what they're trying to feed you, which my YouTube is the best thing ever for that. Now I'm only fed what I want to see documentary-wise, which are excellent. But I feel your public spaces have different questioning in my mind, because you haven't, as far as I'm concerned, agreed to being targeted day in, day out. You've bought your phone. And you've downloaded your app. And you've clicked on that button, signing off all your rights. You've done that. So there's little I can do on that regulation side of things. But as far as I'm concerned, you haven't done that for your public space.
No, it's very true.
So the fact that the fact that 4 out of 5 billboards are in working class areas, they haven't signed. But they want to be constantly bombarded with commercial ads. But we all know that lobbies in the wealthy areas are much more powerful, and we have more lawyers in those areas who will be like, you know what, I don't want those billboards, and I can write you a very strong legal letter that would say that you cannot have it here. So we're using the vulnerability of people, which is why we have a civic duty to specifically look at people who are in a more vulnerable position, that they will be constantly extra targeted, and they will be feeling extra bad mentally. I think that's where the civic duty comes in. And that's where the awareness is to come into. Now, on a positives note, is a body positivity movement or Black Lives Matters started with people being aware that there was a problem. And we've seen that this can shift things. So we just have to be aware. I think awareness, again, is something that's going to trigger change. So the more we talk about it, the more we can be like, look, instead of the next billboard, actually, we want public art. And a public art can be sponsored by a brand. A brand can still ultimately be in the public space.
Yeah.
But they can be doing it in a very different way.
Yeah, I think that's what is like. I love that idea from a brand perspective, because I don't know, you might have seen the sort of trend. This is going back online with the kind of CGI. I think Rimmel did one, and like with the lipstick and stuff like that. And that's art, right? And that's actually something that's a bit different. I saw one with like a bra on Tower Bridge and stuff, which was amazing. But yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity there to sort of take control a little bit more. It's about education, right? And like you say, it's the awareness side. Yeah. And it feels like the book is going to be doing that as well.
I hope so.
Good. Who's the book? Who did you write the book for? Did you kind of write it for everyone? Was it really? Did you have that in your mind?
Yeah, I think I have a contract with my 5-year-old, which is myself when I was 5, on whether my 5-year-old would endorse something that I'm doing today.
I love that.
I think my 5-year-old would definitely endorse that. And then the second contract, sadly, she just passed away, but it's with Granny, and whether she would endorse what I'm doing, the two of them would endorse it. And then after this, it was generally for everyone. That's the reason why I didn't want to be with a niche publisher of the art world. I wanted to be with a mainstream publisher.
Right. I
think it's as relevant for a 13-year-old as it is for someone that has kids and wants to parent them and know what kind of content they get exposed to, or for themselves, that it is for someone that's much older. Yeah. I don't see an age limit on this content. It's a very relevant conversation. And in fact, I've started trialing visual education on the school of my eldest, who is 4. They can pick up on this. If I tell them, think of like I always mention this example that Coca-Cola spends 4.2 billion on advertising a year. Mm-hmm. So you are currently seeing more images of Coca-Cola than nature or arts as you walk around your city. Mm. But think of this screaming red advert when you're 4 years old. Like the impact, Yeah. And that's what we teach the kids, is we say, how does that make you feel? Mm. Because the scale will depend so much more, and the scream of the colors and everything will be felt so differently depending on your age. Yeah. Same with geopolitical images of conflicts. Like, think if you're 13 and you're seeing some of the recent geopolitical images, you need to be equipped with words to talk about that, because you're actually mentally distressed by that. You don't want your 13 years old to just stay with that image in their head, having not discussed it. So just harming the kids to just be able to talk about it is already a first step. And to say, I've seen that and I actually don't feel good about it. And I want to discuss it. Yeah. Because we can't shield them away from the images they're going to see, but we can help them talking about it and being able to be educated about it.
I guess one of the best examples of like knowing how influential brands can be in their imagery is, back to Coca-Cola, is basically Father Christmas was invented by Coca-Cola, right? Yes. So like
and
before,
CA actually, which is Michael Levitz, and we're all going all full circle.
Yeah, but like it's crazy how like if anyone ever wants an example, but Father Christmas pretty much only exists because of Coca-Cola's work from pushing imagery at such a big scale so many years ago.
For all the kids in distress and on this episode, though, I would say there was version of him.
Yes, there was.
Perfect in the
it
past.
Was Saint Nick, wasn't it?
Yes, you have loads of crying people on that episode.
Yeah. I know your grandmother was a huge influence on you because she reached 100, didn't she?
She is, she just passed away 3 weeks ago, so I think I'm struggling with the E's and the was is the answer. Yeah. She was 101.
Wow.
I'm writing a lot as we speak because I'm going through grief. But it's quite beautiful to go through grief as you have kids, because I see my kids in front of me if you are a reminder of her. But yeah, she was the one who gave me unconditional love. She's the reason why I can stand on 2 feet. And it's very weird when the person who gave you unconditional love is gone. It feels like it's a very different space to be in.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but yeah, I wanted to mention it because I know she's had been a massive influence on you.
Yeah, she's massive. I mean, it's a very different generation. Resistant during the war, 6 kids, ran the business. Like every time we complain, I'm just like, it's just nothing in comparison with what that generation would have gone for. But again, a very high sense of moralities, which I really take from that generation, where they could really fight for morals and ethics.
Yeah, for sure. So what's in the future? What's kind of coming up, I guess, in 2024? You've obviously got the book, and that's just come out a few weeks ago. So I'm sure there's a lot around that. But anything else to look out for? The
company is expanding quite drastically as we speak. So Europe, Middle East, and the US are our core markets. I think the example of the sculpture part dedicated to how do we address slavery, we're going to be behind a lot of projects that basically helps you addressing topics that you've never addressed in the public space, and doing so visually, and that's really exciting. We're also seeing as the audiences are wanting to partake more in our space, we're also creating more spaces for them to contribute to the conversation. So actually, if you do a project with a brand or a public space or a digital space, how do you include the audiences so that they get to shape what they want to see, and that conversation is better placed, and that we are really the heart of the conversation between artists and audiences. I think in terms of the book, there's a lot of documentaries in preparation, which would be great. We really want that to be large and loud. And I think given how well it was received so far, it's got me bolder to want to push that content even more.
Yeah.
I didn't know it could be that either, but you see, you're discovering this every day as you go. So I feel like let's just see how far it can go. But I think if we trigger change, it'll be over the moon. I'm helping behind the scenes writing policies on how do we make public art more integrated.
Yeah.
We're really on to change, and I feel we've been at it for a long time, but I think we're in a good timing to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, look, congrats on everything, the book, the business, everything you've been through. It's been amazing to talk to you and meet you as well, and have the conversation today. I definitely learned a lot about the art space, and hopefully I can make some better informed decisions myself. But
I would love that.
Thank you so much for coming down. I really appreciate it. And best of luck for everything in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.